Good morning. Now we are ready to start. Distinguished guests, welcome to Turkish Pavilion and thank you very much for joining us for our panel. I will be the moderator today and we will focus on the sustainable mobility, which is an important driver for climate actions. This panel brings together the representatives of the public authority, the academy, and the private sector for an inclusive discussions considering transport in terms of climate change. First, I would like to introduce our panelists. Mr. Hasan Boz is here with us today. He is Deputy General Director in the Ministry of Transport and Infrastructure of Turkey. Professor Dr. Alper Ünal, he's from the Istanbul Technical University, Eurasia Institute of Earth Science, and he's also the founder of the Sustainable Transport Initiative of Turkey. And Mr. Melih Yalçın, he is senior of Bin Yatırımlar Holding. As you're all familiar at this COP, there are discussions of fossil fuel phase out and use of sustainable fuels. Some countries, some parties have called for the development of the roadmap for these. These actions are not only for the energy production sector, but also for the sectors which are heavily dependent on fossil fuels, like transportation. As you all know, transportation is very important since it counts the 50% of the global greenhouse gas emissions in total. And in the UNFCCC, I mean in the Paris Agreement, NDCs are the primary instruments for the implementation in order to raising the climate targets. According to the NDC synthesis report of this year, 28% of parties highlighted legislations, strategies and actions considering transportation, which is good. And also in the NDC of Turkey, it highlights the model shift in transportation, considering it's a priority sector for Turkey. At this point, I would like to give floor to Mr. Hasan Boz in order to explain us to the mitigation strategies and actions of the Turkey. And the floor is yours, Mr. Boz.
Thank you, Nazan. First of all, good morning to everyone, and thank you for coming here. And it is my pleasure. Actually, this is my first COP meeting, and it is my pleasure to be here in Belém for COP meeting, and in a very critical issue of a climate change, that is sustainable transport and mobility. But just before my presentation, I would like to extend my sincere gratitude to everyone who has worked in this organization, and also other colleagues who has organized this meaningful, this valuable event and bringing us together with you. As a representative of the Turkish Ministry of Transport, today I would like to share with you the strategies, policies of ministry, and also what we have done about greening transportation, greening logistics and urban mobility. Okay. So as the Turkish Ministry of Transport, we are responsible for infrastructure investments. This involves planning, funding and development of transport infrastructure projects such as highways, bridge, railway, ports and infrastructure. These infrastructure investments are very valuable for the connectivity, but another important dimension is sustainability. So while we are planning these projects, we also pay great attention to the sustainability. Our second role is to regulate all transport modes. This means we set up the policies, strategies, laws and regulations for all transport modes, road, railway, aviation and also maritime. And again, ensure safety and security and efficiency are our main goals. And finally, we are responsible from digitalization and communication, especially development of intelligent transport systems and e-government services are highly essential for us. So in our policies, so just let me check. Okay. Turkey has already shown great commitment to the Paris Agreement. It is a part of the Paris Agreement. And as a candidate country to the European Union, we have aligned our legislation. We are aligning our legislation, and here our goal is to align our legislation with the European Green Deal. And finally, as Turkey, we have developed our own strategies, 2033 net zero emissions target, in line, aligned with Paris Agreement and European Green Deal. Okay. So in our legislation works, our main focus is modal shifts. As we all know that road transport is the main contributor to the greenhouse emissions. So around 94% of all emissions, CO2 emissions, come from international transport and road transport within the Turkey. And we have been working our legislation to align our legislation. Okay. I can just sit here. Okay. So when we consider in Turkey, 90% of domestic passenger transportation is by road and 85% of domestic freight transportation again by road. It is very interesting. In international transport, in international trade, normally the maritime transport is the dominant sector. But in Turkey, here, the share of road transport is again very high, around 33. Of our export is carried by road. So modal shift is very important for us. And in our project, in our studies, we try to reduce the emissions of road transportation. Okay. So one of the points that we do is to focus on railway infrastructure investments, especially in recent years. We all know that railway transportation is around 70%. It produces 70% less emissions when compared to the road. So the railway infrastructure investments are very important for us, especially in recent years. While the share of road transport investment was very high, this has been changing. Now, when we compare this year, 57% of infrastructure investment goes to the railway, while the road or the share of road has reduced around 38%. Now I want to give an example from another project, Marmaray. Marmaray is one of our best projects that connects Istanbul under the sea. In Istanbul, we have European side and Asian side. So the Marmaray project, it was completed in 2013, and it has yielded very fruitful results. So 63 million emissions we have received in recent years through the Marmaray project. So Marmaray is just one example. In other projects, we still have the same procedures and the same policies. We try to provide an uninterrupted and sustainable public transport systems, and we especially pay attention to the integration of railway with the buses and light trains and so on. It is not only the railways, but we also, when we do infrastructure investment, such as the airports or roads and so on, sustainability is a very important issue. In Turkey, we have completed most of our infrastructure investments for the roads. And in recent years, we are focusing on ecological bridges. Ecological bridges, they are very essential for wildlife, protecting wildlife, but it's also a good model of sustainability. Until now, we have constructed 11 ecological bridges, and we are planning 14 new ecological bridges on the highways of Turkey. Again, as for the airports, we have a similar strategy. 52 of our airports, they have been accredited by Airports Council International as customer and environmental friendly airports. I already mentioned about road transportation. It is the most dominant sector. So one of the best practices about modal shift is intermodal or combined transport. Especially in international transport, we are focusing on development of intermodal combined transport strategies. Our main trade partner is European Union. So between Turkey and European Union, we are trying to open new RoRo lines. RoRo means transportation of the trucks through the ships. It facilitates the movement of the trucks in the distances. I mean, just imagine when we perform transportation from Turkey to Italy, around 70% of operations are through the maritime. So this reduces the movement of the trucks, and it also helps us or helps the companies a better organization for the sustainability. And again, another alternative choice is Rola. In Rola, we carry the trucks through the railway. So the consumers, they can access the services in a cheaper way, but also it's a sustainable solution. In order to encourage multimodal transport, we have started a new initiative, that is certification of green logistics. The main purpose is to encourage the companies to raise the public awareness about multimodal solutions. So the companies, if they comply with certain criteria, for example, if they have the ISO standards or if they have certain amount of multimodal transport, they should also use energy and water savings, and they should focus on the utilizations. So the logistic companies, when they meet this criteria, they are given green logistic certificates, and when the logistic companies have such certificates, they get certain amount of tax refund from the government. Again, this is a good practice for greening the transportation and logistics. So we all know that electrical scooters, which has been very popular in recent years, but especially during the pandemic. During the pandemic, most people, they prefer to travel alone. So electrical scooters became a very popular mode of transportation. As far as I know, there was no regulation, not only in Turkey, but in the world. So when electrical scooters became popular, as the government, we took a decision. We prepared a legislation in 2022, and the main purpose of this regulation was to show or to ensure that these electrical scooters are legal, and also we want to encourage the companies to make investment. So when we have the legislation, then the investment came, and many companies, they invested for the electrical scooters. And another advantage is that for the electrical scooters especially, they are a very good model of sustainability. My colleagues will make more presentation about use of electric scooters. So as the government, we give licenses to the companies, and currently we have 25 electrical scooter companies, and we have around 50,000 electrical scooters. When we had the legislation, electric scooters became popular, but also we brought some safety and security measures, especially for the traffic. We brought the new rules. So after the legislation, it has been very popular in Turkey, and we can also follow the electric scooters in real-time environment. So it helps us to ensure the traffic of the electric scooters. Another important issue, I mean, the model shift is the first focus. We try to use alternative transport modes, but to some extent, it is not possible. I mean, cars or road transportation, it is the most popular transport mode because it is easier to access. When we compare it to the railway infrastructure investment or other modes of transport, again, road is very easy to access and it is cheap. So second policy is greening the transportation, road transportation. Here, the electrical vehicles are very important. I mean, in Turkey, we see a very sudden increase or very sudden use of electrical vehicles. In the recent years, or in the last 2 years, the number of electrical vehicles has increased 4 times. But again, when we compare in total, the share of electrical vehicles are very limited. Just 1.7% of all vehicles in traffic, they are electrical vehicles. But in the next year, I am sure that we will see many increase in the electrical vehicles. Another strategy is, I mean, especially for the heavy goods vehicle, the number of electrical vehicles are not sufficient. So at this stage, we are focusing on using higher standards of trucks. They are Euro 6 trucks in international transport and logistics, and we encourage the companies to use Euro 6 trucks. And finally, I want to talk about digitalization of transports. As the Minister of Transport, we provide licenses to the companies, and for each license, we need tens of documents, physical documents. So we focus on paperless transport, which means that in the licenses and in every transport document, the customs document or other licenses, we provide the services in digital environments. We have developed our integration with different public authorities and also private authorities, the banks and commerce. So almost everything is done through digitalization. And around 90% of all our services are through e-government. So if you want to buy a car, you don't need physical licenses. If you want to establish a logistic company, you don't need physical papers. They are all registered. They are all in digital environments, and companies, they can easily access these services, and the hauliers, the citizens, they don't need to go to bank or they don't need to go to public offices. They are all done in government. For the people, it is an easy access and they reduce their movement, and for the government, it is an effective mechanism to monitor the system, to monitor the authorities and so on. So about the sustainable transport, we are trying to do our best to reduce and show our commitment to the greenhouse emissions, but still we have these challenges. The dominance of road transport or difficulties of the changing habits of the consumers, they are the challenges we should solve. And again, the rail and infrastructure investment, they are very important, but the high cost is another barrier that stops us for the model shift. But we will work together with our stakeholders and we will continue our commitment to the net zero emissions and hope we will solve it. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Boz, for this valuable presentation and for sharing the politics of ministry with us, because they are so important. Transport emissions, as we are familiar, must be drastically reduced to achieve our main goal, net zero emissions, and to limit the global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. This makes the transport sector a key player for the climate targets in the agenda, and this requires concrete measures for this sector. I want to share the statistics. International Energy Agency's net zero emission scenarios assumes 90% shift in the transport modes, and they offer the use of sustainable fuels. You know, this is very ambitious and a bold target, and at this point we have to consider whether it is possible, what are the challenges and what are the benefits of these. So at this point, I would kindly like to give floor to Professor Dr. Alper Ünal in order to inform us in this perspective for the urban transportation. Professor, the floor is yours.
Hi everyone. So my name is Alper. So I'm really honored to be here as part of this COP meeting. And before I start, I just would like to let you know that as a professor, I'm used to stand out and walk around. So if I try to do that, I apologize at the beginning. So the title of my presentation is Roads, Rails, Runways, a Decade of Transport Greenhouse Gases Emissions in Turkey and the Path to 2030. So the outline of my talk is I'm going to first talk about motivation and the context. And then I would like to highlight especially the micromobility and how important micromobility is. Then I would like to give you a little bit more information on the e-scooters from an greenhouse gas perspective, as well as air pollution and congestion. And I would like to end my talk with a summary of 2030 climate pathways and transport mitigation. So Mr. Hassan actually did a great presentation. Thank you. No, I'm fine. Thank you. So in his talk, he gave a really good summary of the transportation projects that's been ongoing in Turkey. I just would like to highlight a couple of important points. So as mentioned before, about 14 to 18% of total emissions is due to transportation, and 94% of that is due to on-road emissions. So this is a huge number. And like in other countries, in Turkey, we had a growth section for the greenhouse emissions from transportation. And due to pandemic, there was a slight pause, but then unfortunately it's going up. So this pretty much tells us that we have to use all the available mitigation measures that we have in our hands. So again, Mr. Hassan mentioned this, but I just would like to highlight this. There has been several major projects undertaken by Turkish government, and Marmaray and Istanbul Metrobus Bus Rapid Transit Project, a couple of these, and they were able to reduce CO2 emissions by 150 to, let's say, 500 tons per day. And along these mitigation measures, as we know, there have been a lot of technological improvements in, especially in on-road vehicles, the introduction of the electric vehicles, and there's been a great push by the Turkish government for the modal shift to rail, to maritime, and these are all really important and developments. Now, I would like to highlight another important aspect. So, in Turkey, in Istanbul, there has been several studies, and they show that about 70% of all trips and 40% of all motor vehicle trips are under 5 kilometers, which is pretty much the same number in all metropolitan areas. And these actually short trips are important, not because they actually have a huge percentage of the total trips, but also these trips happen where people live. And they tend to have more stop and go traffic, which tends to have more emissions. And these are actually then ideal candidates for substituted by walking, cycling, e-bikes. And if you look at North America and Europe, actually there has been studies that show that about 10 to 20% of short trips can be actually replaced by micromobility options. Now, of course, if we introduce new mitigations, new solutions, we have to also understand what are their implications in terms of greenhouse gases. As you all might all be aware, the sources for these e-scooters, the greenhouse gas emission sources are due to manufacturing, battery production and replacement, operations and rebalancing, and electricity mix. But if we compare this to internal combustion engine vehicles, there we have, of course, the manufacturing, but also fuel use. To a lot of people's surprise, actually, there is a huge variation in terms of emissions from the micromobility sources like e-scooters. So I would like to show this nice study by Baumgartner and Helmers in 2024 that actually compared different emission factors for internal combustion engines, electric vehicles, as well as e-scooters. What is really striking in this figure is for most of the sources, the emission factors, the variation in emission factors is not that great, but for e-scooters, it is huge. Depending on their lifetime, it can be much more than internal combustion engines. But if it is like high and operation plans are better, their emissions can be 1/4 of the internal combustion engine. So just this graph even tells me that it might be a solution, but you have to be really careful about it. So at this point, I would like to just show a couple of numbers which I was able to obtain from Mr. Hassan. Thank you for that. So here are the use of e-scooters in Turkey by province, and for 2025, for this year, we have about 6.8 million kilometers traveled on e-scooters, and as expected, they are actually heavily conducted in big cities. Istanbul is making about 30% of all travel, and the other large cities are like the top 5 is making about 80%. Now, how is then this compared to emissions? If one makes one scenario, I know it doesn't make sense. You can't assume that e-scooters are actually replacing ICs, but what if we do that? Then I did this basic estimate. So this is showing that in every province, almost the emissions are reduced by 3 or 4 times. So as percentage, these are really huge numbers. But then one can ask the question, okay, so at province level and in terms of percentages, this is big, but does it make sense in terms of overall greenhouse gas emissions? And the answer is unfortunately no, not at this point. The numbers I got for 2025 is making about 0.001% of total greenhouse gas emissions from transportation. But I think it is important to say at this point that there is a value here, and if we plan and invest and operate intelligently, I think micromobility might be a one way for us to mitigate greenhouse gases. The nice thing is, it's not just the greenhouse gases. So I would like to just switch gears at this point and just highlight the possible impact on air pollution. So if you look at what's happening in air pollution in Turkey over the years, there have been huge push with the new vehicle standards and renewal of the fleet and expansion of public transport. The emissions are going down drastically. So here's one example for NOx emissions, of total NOx emissions in Turkey. So there has been a huge improvement. So this is good news, but then this is bad news. So if you look at here, what I have is speed profile of one instrumented vehicle on the left side of the graph, and on the right side we have the CO emissions. So the emissions are instantaneous, meaning that in some trips about over 90% of emissions, air pollutant emissions, can occur in less than 1% of the trip. Why this is important? Because like I said, about 40% of the motor vehicle trips are occurring with less than 5-kilometer trips, and these are in urban areas. So all these emissions are causing high exposures to people walking around or even driving in their cars. So in this slide, I'm showing the possible impact of the congestion on air pollution, and the figure is actually based on my personal studies back when I was doing my PhD. But then that's finding which shows that congestion actually increases emissions by 3 to 4 times is also being supported by recent studies done in the United States and China. So if we want to tackle not just greenhouse gases, but other sustainable development goals like air pollution and health at the same time, there is a way, and micromobility is one of those. But again, I think one has to be really clever in finding the right ways to use these tools. So this is my last slide. I would like to, I am sorry. Okay, so I thought you guys were seeing this, but then let me then quickly show this. So this is the slide that shows the instantaneous impact of emissions. And again, congestion is causing these huge problems. All right, so I have to check. Now, just to summarize the mitigation priorities, as mentioned in our NDC, there have been several options for the mitigation options. I just would like to highlight the fact that all these efforts need to happen in parallel. All these efforts to have balanced and cleaner model mix, electrification and the use of clean fuels, and aviation and maritime decarbonization, I think it has to happen. Like Nazan mentioned, transportation is making a huge chunk of emissions, and the expectation is to reduce that emissions by 90%. I think one thing that I would want you to remember from my talk is, I think, the fact that micromobility should also be included in these sustainable transportation options. With that, I would like to thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Ünal, for sharing us this academic perspective in this inclusive presentation. You considered all of the sustainability approaches, all respects, life cycle assessment, and air pollution. Thank you very much for the presentation. And as Professor Ünal and Mr. Boz illustrated, in Turkey, infrastructure and regulation have been developed. So with these developments, many innovative companies have emerged in the mobility sector. They're achieving remarkable success in terms of mobility. And among them, Bin Yatırımlar Holding stands out, since they are focusing not only on the mobility solutions, but they're focusing also on a broader, holistic ecosystem of transport. Their works illustrates how can private sector lead for the transformation in terms of transport, considering the climate targets. And it is very valuable to have integrated mobility solutions in this term. Now I would like to kindly give floor to Mr. Melih Yalçın. He will present the business models and the operations of Bin Yatırımlar Holding and the related contribution to climate change. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nazan Hanım. I would like to express my gratitude to everyone over here, and thanks a lot for the organizing committee for setting up this fabulous event. I'm representing Bin Yatırımlar Holding, which is a Turkish diverse conglomerate active in mobility business. It was established in 2020 with the objective of transforming the mobility market in Turkey from fossil-based transportation to electrification. And that was mainly driven by several objectives, and one of them was road transportation accounts for almost 25 to 30% of greenhouse gas emissions in Turkey. And even if we talk about Istanbul only, it even exceeds the 30% threshold. So we are talking about a massive GHG emission, since Turkey is demographically a problematic country from a congestion perspective. And short car trips in big cities are actually amplifying these emissions, and that's the reason why we have directly focused on remedying the issues in bigger cities. And these cities actually struggle with air pollution, mobility inefficiency, leading to additional problems and negative living conditions. And one other issue, it's a kind of self-criticism for ourselves, that we have a lack of full-stream public transportation, which is even exacerbating the conditions from a sustainability perspective. And for that reason, we have directly focused on last mile transportation. And what we regard with last mile is actually the range that remains below 8 kilometers can be directly addressable with the introduction of micromobility equipment. and that constitutes almost 58% of in-city transportation only in Istanbul. So I just want to show an interesting chart. We are not happy to be in the first rank in this graph, frankly speaking, because it's just showing that the number of hours that's being spent in the traffic. And as Istanbul, we are ranked in the first position, followed by New York, Chicago, London, and Mexico City. And as you can see from the figure, we are spending 105 hours per year only in the traffic, implying that a habitant in Istanbul is losing 4 days a year only in the traffic. And if we just narrow this list down to Asia only, we have some additional cities from Turkey, including Ankara, Bursa, and Izmir. So this actually explains the whole story. I mean, if we are talking about congestion, and if majority of the transportation is done below the 8-kilometer threshold, we had to address this problem. And for that reason, we directly focused on Istanbul. And if you can see from this chart, Istanbul is not only a city which has a traffic problem during the peak hours. As you can see from the red zone, Istanbul has congestion problem for almost 12-13 hours a day, implying that an Istanbul habitant could spend even more time than anyone else in the country. And for that reason, we just focus on remedying the problem primarily by introducing our micromobility arm with the brand name called Bin Bin. It's similar to the jet that's staying outside right now. I really like the equipment. The reason is Istanbul is an extremely populated city. It has 18 million people with almost 6 million vehicles. And one more important figure is the density of the population, because whenever we look at the number of people per square kilometer, we reach to a figure of 2.8 thousand people per square kilometers. And this shows that the city is extremely packed. But another critical figure, which I took from Professor Ünal, thanks for that, the vehicle ownership figure, because 330 people per 1,000 have cars. They have their vehicles in Istanbul, in Turkey. But the benchmark figure for this in the EU zone is around 800 vehicles per 1,000. We are remaining below this threshold, implying that as long as the income levels in Turkey grow, there is a potential that there will be even more vehicles in Turkey if we align this figure with that of European Union. So that's actually an issue that we want to address, and we want to stop people from buying more and more vehicles and jump into the shared mobility ecosystem. So, I'm sorry for not jumping, yeah. So if we just look at what we are doing as Bin Yatırımlar, we have more than 30,000 green vehicles across Europe, and we are among the top 5 operators currently in Europe. We're operating in 16 cities in Turkey and more than 30 cities across Europe. Business lines include micromobility, EV charging, renewable energy generation, and digital payments. And the last business that we have introduced is the digital green taxi. The reason for that is you cannot make everyone to use micromobility equipment, scooters. They could be elderly people, they could be extremely young, etc. So we have a regulation that's defining that. But for the use of easiness, we have introduced a digital taxi in Turkey, converting internal combustion engine vehicles to purely electrified vehicles. And that's the reason why we are relying on a holistic business model to create the in-depth sustainability of the whole transportation model. So if you just look at this pyramid, we see that we have a micro-mobility business at the top. But in addition to that, we have introduced digital taxi with pure EV fleet. But these two transportation means certainly require a single source, which is electric. And in order to supply that electric, you need to have an EV charging platform, which we have developed back in 2022. And for the overall business model, in order to maintain your Scope 2 and Scope 3 targets, you need to generate that electricity from sustainable resources. I mean, you cannot just power that network with fossil fuel or coal-fired plants, and therefore we needed to establish our existing renewable infrastructure to fuel the whole value chain in our business model. And that's actually creating a stronger impact through the vertical integration that we have maintained. So we are not only a micro-mobility player, we are an energy company together with being a mobility transition company. So just final slides. I talked about managing the ESG aspect of the business, and as you can see, we can not only deploy scooters and taxis on the streets and leave them to the inhabitants to be utilized. I mean, you need to manage your scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 perspectives. And at that point, our strategy for scope 1 was to transform the fossil transportation to electric in Turkey. Scope 2 is provide clean energy to all fleets. And scope 3 is controlling the value chain members to comply with our existing sustainability strategy. And that requires a massive amount of technological control and technological adaptation. And that's the reason why we are spending strong budgets on technology to align with the sustainability targets. Up until now, I have defined you a business model which also has some interactions with the Sustainable Development Goals of United Nations. We have identified 6 major targets, and we are purely focusing on these matters. One of them is SDG number 7, which is affordable and clean energy. We are certainly providing transition to clean energy with the use of transport. SDG 8 is decent work and economic work. I mean, imagine how many people are working for us in our operations, in our software, IT, technology, etc. All of these people and our colleagues are purely motivated with sustainability targets. SDG number 9 is industry, innovation, and infrastructure. 11 is sustainable cities and communities, and we're also proud to directly interact with target number 12, which is responsible consumption and production. The reason is we are procuring more kick scooters, e-bikes, and mopeds every year, and that's actually pushing our Chinese suppliers to produce more micromobility equipment as compared to standard vehicles. So it's also triggering the shift, the sustainability shift in the overall value chain as well. And another proud issue to be proud of is SDG number 13, which is climate action. We are directly impacting on greenhouse gas emissions. We're actually complementing and executing what needs to be done and developed by the policymaker with the academicians, and we are the end point of this by implementing the whole business into real life applications. I thank you very much for taking your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Melih Bey, for your insightful presentation and sharing your business models with us. And I would like to thank again to all our panelists for their presentations. They highlighted the Turkey's standpoints in all respects. We hope these panel will inspire the ongoing momentum of Turkey in the sustainable mobility approach. And we also hope the ongoing COP meeting will contribute significantly to the climate targets. And we also would like to thank the Ministry of Environment, Urbanization and Climate Change of Republic of Turkey for this great pavilion, as always. And it's a great pleasure to be here in this pavilion full of guests. And thank you very much for participating in the panel. And so we are on time. Then we will be glad to answer your questions if you have after this session. Thank you again. We have to wait for the microphone. Please wait for a little.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Yeah.
much for the very informative panel. I'm Cecile, I'm coming from Cameroon. At this moment, the Ministry of Transport in Cameroon has requested us to help them integrate or mainstream gender in the transportation. Do you have any experience on that? Because it's a very sensitive sector, and we hope that we can learn more from Turkey. Thank you.
You want to answer?
gender?
Okay. Actually, I hear it. Okay. Gender equality is very important for us in transport sector, and we have a very good new project. Engagement of women as drivers. We have started this project because, it is not only about gender, it is equal opportunity, especially for the women, ladies. Last year, we started this project. Currently, we have 500 women, and we are providing training for them. We are also subsidizing them for getting the licenses to be in traffic and getting CPC, Certificate of Professional Competence, to become professional drivers. Some of them are already on road, and we have very good examples. Some ladies, some women, for example, who lost their husbands, and being a driver gave them a life opportunity to continue provide their education, continue or provide their families and so on. Or some of the women drivers, for example, they were together with their husbands, so normally they have to wait 2 weeks, 3 weeks while they are performing international transport operations, so they don't have to wait. And also the children, we had the shuttle buses for the children at school. When the driver is a woman, believe me, I am also a father, the children are much happier. And for the families, when they say women driver taking their children to school, they feel much more confident. So we have very good models and very good examples. Maybe in one of the other activities we can provide some more information, but it's a very important point. Thank you.
And we have another question from there.
Thank you so much. Your presentation was very insightful. I am Hortense Traoré from Burkina Faso, and I would like to ask a question about if you have capacity building for youth, because we do have a lot of vehicles, but unfortunately it is with fossil fuel. And I saw here that you can transform fossil fuel vehicle to electric vehicle. Do you have a capacity building program for youth maybe, which will allow them to transform in our country also to transform our fossil fuel vehicle to electric vehicle? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for this question. We learned from the applications of United Nations, frankly speaking, because whenever you get into this ESG environment, you need to address multiple aspects. You need finance for that. You need application capabilities, strategic planning, design, etc., etc. So we have actually developed our existing model first to educate the community well. Because if you cannot educate your community, you're not going to be able to transit the habitual way of transiting from ICE engines, fossil fuel engines, to electric vehicles. Therefore, you need to maintain the utmost capability first to cooperate with local administrations, municipalities, and then with the support of the government, you need to cascade this strategy down to the society. So it was a kind of customized business model and strategic plan that we have developed internally. And the reason is we are not only operating in Istanbul, it's a developed city, but we're also operating in developing regions as well, which is even a harder task to transform those people from using fossil engines to EV engines. So that needs to be customized as per country, per culture, and per region. But we can discuss on that after the panel if you wish. Mr. Ünal has some additional words.
Thank you very much for the question. I think it's a very important part of the solution. And as part of the other work that I'm doing, I'm a founder for the Sustainable Mobility Initiative. And we have recently started working on this, working with different parts of the society to increase awareness and tell them how this actually helps them, not just globally, but locally and individually. And I think all these programs needs to be even developed further. Thank you.
I'm looking if there are more questions. Yes, please. You can use my microphone if you want.
Thank you for this opportunity. I'm Sofia from Brazil, delegation from Brazil, and it's not better invest in electric public transportation instead of private electric transportators, because the battery is so pollutant. So if you make a lot of batteries for private transportation, you have more pollutants. Do you understand? Can you understand this?
That's also a part of our existing ESG strategy. We are not actually empowering or supporting people to use their own vehicles. We're just trying to advise them to jump into shared micromobility. The reason is you need to optimize the use of equipment. Otherwise, you're going to be having a massive amount of garbage in the future. And we're talking about a dangerous type of garbage, which is lithium. And the technology is quite risky from the energy point of view. But if you use it in a responsible manner with the right efficiency and effectiveness rates, you're going to be able to maximize the societal output. So that's the reason why instead of having your own personal equipment, we advise people to use shared mobility.
I would like to also highlight a couple of points. Mr. Melih actually mentioned the traffic problem in Istanbul, right? So it's a problem all over the world in these large cities. So I think part of the solution is to really have an integrated transportation planning. So people choose to drive their own vehicles most of the time because it is difficult to use mass transit if they are not integrated. I definitely agree with you. The mass transit is a much better solution, but then we have to be really intelligent in integrating them and solve individuals' problems, not just come up with ad hoc solutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your interest. It's a great honor for us to share our perspective with this great crowd. Thank you for your participation again.